one worker is fired because of their union activities, the entire facility has the right to walk off the job and withhold their labor to support that worker. And guess what? That's what you are pushing workers quicker to.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
You are the National Director for the Teamsters Amazon Division, and over the last couple of years, 10,000 workers have organized with the Teamsters at Amazon warehouses and delivery service providers, DSPs, across the country. Can you talk? There are a few things like in the news that have happened recently that are going to affect or they might affect the Amazon campaign by the Teamsters. But I want to start with, why are workers organizing? What are the working conditions at Amazon? Because the Amazon union campaign has been a little bit out of the news for the last several months, and I want to remind people just the real BS that workers have to put up with at Amazon. So why are workers organizing at Amazon across the country?
Well, let me first say the reason why we've been out of the news is purposeful. We don't need to dominate the news all the time, because if you look at the way we dominated the news cycle in December, it was pretty darn, overpowering. And you got to pick and choose your moments as workers are doing what they're doing incredibly. And so the best way to describe how, the working conditions is, let's just use a simple comparison. A UPS driver delivers to just about does deliver to every neighborhood in America, right? And that UPS driver can afford to buy a home in almost any one of those neighborhoods. Not every neighborhood, but almost any one of those neighborhoods. An Amazon driver cannot buy a home in any neighborhood. They statistically do not qualify. So now let's move over into the warehouse operations. And if you go to work, let's say you're 18 years old, you go to work in an Amazon operation, like they are recruiting most of their new employees. You land there at 18, 19, 20 years old. How long is it going to take you to buy a home, to qualify to buy a home in the very area in which that operation is, put down? Again, that is very narrow. We're still trying to find the neighborhoods you can buy a home in if you go to work for Amazon. That is a massive problem when it employs over 1 million employees. Then that's the economic factor and how it immediately impacts the communities in which these operations are in. Then you look at the working conditions, that there's not clearly a fair exchange of difficult, extreme conditions. Working in this industry is tough. For those of us that came out of it and have represented it for 3 decades, we're well aware of those conditions. And, there's supposed to be a fair exchange where you do a very tough, difficult job. You make enough money to where the trade-off is worth it. That is why Amazon has the insane turnover that it does, is because workers get there within a week. We're finding that more than 70% of workers after a week of working for any type of Amazon operation are looking for another job. And so whether it's productivity levels or issues that are happening within the operation and how their working conditions are impacted, their benefits, their retirement or lack of retirement vehicles, as well as their healthcare benefits. They profess that they've got great this, great that, great pay, competitive, and it's not. It's just a narrative that's been pounded over and over again for the general public to believe, when it's really just not the case. And so what's it like, and why are they organizing? They're organizing because the workers recognize and believe, and they're educating themselves on what their rights are. Most workers in America support unions, but they don't understand the system, the process in which it takes to move through. And so as you educate them and explain to them what their rights actually are, they are exercising them quickly. That is why you're seeing what you're seeing happen grow on this massive level. Tens of millions of workers are following these workers at Amazon. Tens of millions of them support these workers. We saw that in December when these workers withheld their labor for a few days just before Christmas. You saw the immense amount of support from the community, from the consumer, and from the industry as a whole and other workers. And the reality is because those others are now getting to learn. The community and others, the consumers, starting to learn of what Amazon's business model really is. And their business model is built on exploitive practices that essentially dump their responsibility either on contractors, dump their responsibility on others, or they try to turn you out as quickly as possible, just move you on somewhere else, and they get a new employee. And the New York Times a few years ago, they actually openly admitted that their business model for hiring employees was not long term; it was actually high turnover on purpose. So, some
Mm.
people say, "Oh, well, you can't live in that environment forever." It's not true. Just think how many millions of kids are graduating every single year from high school. So the workforce is brand new every couple years. And the reality is that workforce is being exploited over and over and over again as each year passes. And what are they doing? They're taking charge. I think what is so inspirational is seeing workers, regardless of what's happening at the board, regardless of what's going on with this administration, but regardless of who may be taking away their rights, workers are exercising their First Amendment right. Because what most people don't realize is the National Labor Relations Act, which was formed in 1935, was actually built out of the Wagner Act from 1934. And the argument that prevailed for protected concerted activity was argued on the basis of the First Amendment and the freedom of speech, the freedom to assemble. Because prior to 1934, it was actually illegal to have an assembly at work. In other words, for you to exercise your First Amendment, to exercise freedom of assembly, and to strike or to withhold your labor, it was illegal prior because our laws were enshrined in slavery. And so you get into 1934, 1935. Finally, the issue that breaks through is my First Amendment right. How is it that I have the freedom of speech and the freedom to assemble, but I lose it when I go to work? That became a compelling argument that created protected concerted activity. Then protected concerted activity has been enshrined in every labor law since then, whether it's a state level or regional or federal, when it comes to RLA or any of the rest of them. What's happened in the last 50 years is there hasn't been an education on what that law is and how workers can exercise it. And so workers in the labor movement admittedly had drifted away from it. And you asked me how we've been able to organize as many to build a very strong local like we have in San Bernardino, is you were listening to exactly how we paid that way. We didn't file NLRB elections in most cases. What we did is we demanded recognition. And if the employer didn't agree, we withheld our labor until they came to the table, until we came to some sort of peace agreement. And if the employer, whether they're public or private sector, can't appreciate that, then guess what? You're going to appreciate it when workers withhold their labor. So bridging that gap for these workers at Amazon and watching them actually take the lead, watching them run out and actually hold themselves accountable, hold the employer accountable, and inspire others has been this cascading effect to hundreds of thousands of workers that is just magnificent to watch and absolutely beautiful. It started with a handful of workers in Palmdale, California, that extended their picket line 20 different times in 2023. And then in 2024, you have almost 25 locations, then do the same thing. And all I can say is there are more to come.
Well, that's incredible, and we were following the Palmdale stuff, and we just talked about a couple of weeks ago how over in your neck of the woods, I believe it is, you were able to get $100,000 in back pay for workers at Amazon. And, I think that's one of that's going to be part of the answer to this question. But, we talked about why workers are organizing, talked about what the working conditions are like at Amazon. The TLDR is that it's terrible. It's a really bad place to work. How would unionization help make things better at Amazon?
So it's a great question. You use the $100,000 as an example of what had been won by the workers. That actually is ticked up above 100,000. That's going to keep going and going and going as more and more workers, turn in their claims and get the back pay on the third break that they were entitled to, that of course the employer didn't notify them of, that they were obligated to. Once it was pointed out, those workers now know the system and are agitating the system for them to get, many of them, thousands of dollars independently each in back pay claims, and they're working our way through the system. And so how are they doing it? What's happening is that the workers are starting to use this claim as an example. They're chipping away at items and issues. Like some of it is making sure that they have cover because they're out on the ramp, that they have shade, that they have water, that they have fans, that they have misters, all these different things that impact the workplace. What these workers are doing is they're signing a petition. They then demand recognition on the boss. They then demand a change, and they chip away at it, and they get these changes location by location. And what the workers realize is yes, Amazon may be changing it there in that moment, but Amazon has the power to change it back if they want. And that the only thing that's going to hold it and make it permanent is for them to have a union contract. And so what they're doing is they're chipping away until they pile it all up enough to then get it memorialized in a union contract. And at some point, the legal process will catch up and hold Amazon accountable. Amazon cannot duck and dodge all these legal arguments that are on their doorstep, that are literally on their doorstep and about ready to overflow on them forever. At some point, they're going to be held to account legally in the system by multiple agencies, multiple organizations, and most importantly, the workers themselves. And in the end, let's assume Amazon completely disregards what their obligation is under the law. The workers are going to shut it down until they do.
And that is ultimately where workers' power comes from. We were talking earlier about the Air Canada flight attendant strike. Had somebody on from Canada to talk about that, and it's great that workers over the past 100 years have been able to get concessions from Congress or from Parliament, as it is in Canada, in laws and rules and things like that we can make use of. But ultimately, we got those because workers before us were able and willing and did withhold their labor to get that. And ultimately, that everything rests on that as our key weapon. And so, I think that's what it's going to take to be able to build a strong union that can get these concessions at Amazon. And that's what the Teamsters have been doing. And of course,
Jacob, can I jump in there?
Yes, please.
Real quick? This is the space that has been a void for too long. This is where we've got to lean into it more. You're 100% correct. Everything that's been gained has been gained by doing exactly what we're talking about right now, is by withholding labor or the threat of withholding labor, a real threat of withholding labor. And we have to continue to occupy that space more and more. And the general public, the more workers learn and understand that they have this right, the more that they are exercising this right. And I think that it's really important for anybody who's advocating for labor, whether it's on a radio show or union representatives or shop stewards or members or workers or elected officials or canvassing, that we continue to pound this message, beat the street on it, and make sure that workers understand you have the power. You've already won. You've won because you have control of that operation already. It's whether or not you are deciding to exercise it. It's whether or not you have decided to actually withhold it and make sure that employer comes to the table on those required subjects.
Mm. And we're going to talk about one of those rules that workers were able to get by striking and building a strong fighting labor movement. That's the National Labor Relations Board, the National Labor Relations Act. And we're talking about workers withholding their labor and striking, and of course Jeff Bezos and the other robber barons of today. They're not going to take an attempt like this to take any amount of power that they have away from them lying down. And really, it's about power, right? I mean, a lot of people, that's what I think anyway. A lot of people talk about the money when it went around conversations of unionization, but I really think that the biggest thing that employers don't like about unions is that when workers unionize, that is them taking some of the power over the place where they spend the majority of their waking lives for themselves. And they don't, and employers don't like having to share that power. And so, Jeff Bezos and folks like that, they're not going to take that lying down. And one of the ways that they've been fighting this is by attempting to have basically the NLRB declared unconstitutional wholesale. They have they've got an argument that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals accepted that because the National Labor Relations Act has protections for board members and its administrative law judges, that those protections are unconstitutional because of the unitary executive theory, and that so therefore the president should have the authority to hire and fire these people at will, and the NLRB that's illegal under the NLRA. They were able to get the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals to agree with that. And so now workers within that jurisdiction in Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana functionally have no NLRB protections. I've been reading some analysis of this, and there are some people that think that ultimately, if the Supreme Court agrees with this, it's not going to be the biggest deal, because ultimately it's just going to kind of speed up the extent to which NLRB board members are turned over. It'll be immediately when a president takes office rather than over the course of a few years. And so, but the biggest deal is going to be in the interim, right? Because right now the NLRB cannot settle disputes basically within Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And so how does this affect the Teamsters strategy with respect to Amazon, or really any of the other national campaigns that y'all are working on? We have a newsletter, Last Week in Southern Labor, where we talk about all of the NLRB election filings and election results, and the Teamsters are one of the most common unions in our newsletter, organizing at UNFI, organizing at Breakthrough Beverages. There are a couple of others where there are national campaigns. And so how does this affect the Teamster strategy, with respect to Amazon or any of these other campaigns that y'all have nationwide?
So you just asked a whole lot of questions.
I know. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. The first thing I'd like to direct people towards is we actually had Jennifer Abruzzo on our show a few weeks ago. And so if you look at the Worker Power Hour or the Teamster View podcast, you can actually pull the Jennifer Abruzzo show. We actually talk a little bit about this. Actually, we talked about this in depth on the show specifically, if you get a chance, because we dug down into this, and the reality is, look, let's be very real. These companies and corporations, and as you pointed out, these robber barons, they do not actually want the board to be unconstitutional, because remember, the board was originally formed, and this is the irony of this whole thing. It was formed to protect workers, period, workers, not corporations, workers. And in 1947, Taft-Hartley then shifted some protections towards corporate America. And since 1947, there's been an argument to protect employers more than workers. And so depending on who the political party is in time, whether is in power at the time, they are going to want to protect either more workers or employers. Clearly, we are in a situation where corporate America is in control of this country, and they want corporations protected over workers. So the reality is this: if it's unconstitutional, then that means the rules are we're not going to be held to those rules either. And so that I can tell you right now, corporate America doesn't want us being unhinged like that. They do not want the American worker unhinged without a set of rules on picketing, how picketing works, secondary boycotts, all that stuff. And so they've opened this door, and they now know they probably quietly know it's a mistake, because guess what? We can argue the same stuff then. Fine. You're going to play that game. Guess what? We can argue legally that there are things that you're doing, corporations, under the National Labor Relations Act, that are unconstitutional then. And I find it ironic that that these companies want to take an obscure, maybe one or two employees from a New York case. One or two employees happen to move to Texas. So then I'm going to use the Fifth Circuit Court to have a ruling and a determination. Clearly, all of that is just legal game delays. It's just to drag everything out.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
I think the most important question to answer here that you asked is, how does this affect workers? I actually think does it affect them some in the short term for slowing some decisions down? Yeah. Well, this process has already been slow. Let's be straight up. I've been doing this over 30 years. I realized very early on, no one should depend on the National Labor Relations Board to have a speedy decision, resolve something for workers that workers have the right to do themselves. Workers under the Act have the right to withhold their labor as a as a resolution to whatever complaint that they're seeking. So in other words, if at some facility of 2,000 workers in Texas, the one worker is fired. If one worker is fired in that facility, and that worker feels like they were fired and retaliated against because of their union activities, the entire facility has the right to walk off the job and withhold their labor to support that worker. That is a First Amendment right. That's protected concerted activity. And guess what? That's what you are pushing workers quicker to, because that issue is not being argued to be unconstitutional. Because I dare corporate America to then attack the First Amendment. I dare them. We will that script will be flipped right on their head, and they cannot take that away. And if they try to take that away, guess what? You're going to have an uprising that's going to escalate even faster than it's escalating now. So the point is it affecting us? No, because if you look at Amazon, we haven't filed any NLRB elections, have we? No. Because we don't depend on, we recognize that workers from the beginning, before CEMEX, and I know one of your questions is going to be on CEMEX, before CEMEX was actually in play, this entire plan was built out for worker power and workers to exert their ability to control an operation where they want to be recognized and represented. And they have that right, and they are exercising that right, and that right is growing. And so what corporations are doing right now is only proving the point as to why workers need to withhold their labor. By them delaying this and playing this game, they're actually proving the point.
Right. Well, let's talk about CEMEX then. That was a major decision that the NLRB arrived at, and it involved the Teamsters, actually. And for folks who don't remember, the CEMEX decision basically said that if an employer so violates labor law, then the National Labor Relations Board can force the company to recognize the union, even if ultimately the election didn't go in favor of the union, because and also the union had to have shown that a majority of workers supported the union before the election by, a majority of them having signed authorization cards. And another point on the CEMEX standard was that if workers with a majority of the workforce having signed authorization cards requests recognition, and the employer does not file for an election within 10 days, then the NLRB automatically says that they recognize the union. And so that is the kind of the legal mechanism, at least as I understand it, that the Teamsters have gotten official recognition at many of these delivery service providers and places like that across the country. And so the CEMEX is a big deal. And so can you tell folks what your understanding is of the state of CEMEX right now under the Trump NLRB? Do you think it'll be overturned? And if so, how's that going to affect Amazon workers who have organized through CEMEX decisions?
First and foremost, it's the law of the land right now. It's currently in play. So regardless of the new administration ends up having a policy or they appoint individuals that are going to try to roll that back, it is currently the path in which workers have a right to exercise, and that is exactly what they're going to do. They're continuing to do exactly that. And so as of right now, it doesn't change anything in the current circumstances. Is there a likely change coming? Sure. But what it doesn't do is no matter what happens with CEMEX, it doesn't take away the worker's right by a majority to exercise their majority status, exercise their right to demand for recognition, exercise their right to make demands upon that employer when they violate the law. And as a result of workers learning this process and understanding where their power is, whether they have a CEMEX decision or not, they have the right to do exactly what they're doing. And the employer ultimately has the ability to recognize, or in many cases, ultimately it comes down to power, is where that power finally lands. And when the workers have exercised that they have superior power, because they do right now, it's a matter of whether or not they're going to exercise it. And that is when Amazon will capitulate or recognize or start to bargain. Let's use and let's use some of the things that Amazon says in the news when the subject comes up and our workers make a demand or do some of the things that they do. Amazon then flips the script and says, hey, these workers, none of them have voted in an NLRB election. What I keep telling reporters is, well, why don't you ask Amazon if they're going to recognize an NLRB election outcome? Because they didn't do that with ALU, which are now Teamsters. And that was in March of 2022. They failed to bargain even in that circumstance. And so no matter what legal iteration is in front of Amazon, they're just snubbing their nose and they're just playing the legal delay game, which is, again, where you lean into workers and say, your employer has already shown their pattern of behavior. They are going to snub their nose at the law, and that's it. What you are going to have to do is you're going to have to bring them to the table by withholding your labor. That's it. That's the answer. You already have won because you already occupy 100% of the operation. So you have control. It's whether or not you're going to exercise that control and what you're going to exercise that control for. What are the terms and conditions you're going to exercise it for?
Right. That's a great answer, I think. And then, back in December, you talked about the Amazon workers striking at that point. Teamsters, like you said, they were able to give Amazon a big black eye, particularly on the media front. I mean, they were just the coverage was wall to wall all over the country in basically every media outlet. And there were picket lines all over the country, which was a really cool part of it. I was able to go to one here in North Alabama. And can you remind folks why workers went on strike at Amazon back in December?
There were a number of different reasons. One was to create awareness, to obviously get the general public, consumers, the customer, everybody to recognize that Amazon's business model and their unfair labor practices combined, it's just bad. It's not good. And that workers have the right to exercise in this way. They have the right to do what they're doing, and they have the right to withhold their labor how they choose to. And that message clearly got out. You just very eloquently put how the workers controlled the media cycle for that 5 days. And no matter what Amazon said, Amazon tried to say those drivers are not ours. Those drivers work for a third party. They're wearing an Amazon uniform, Amazon equipment, in an Amazon van coming out of the Amazon facility. And their PR, as wealthy as they are and as good of a PR system that they have, they got run over. The worker message plowed right through their PR machine and destroyed it. And the consumer, the average person out there started to recognize, you got to be kidding me. You tell me the person that delivers to my doorstep's not an Amazon, that they have an Amazon uniform. What are you talking about? And so what happened is that made the consumer and the community lean in closer to that worker and connect to that worker and be more sympathetic for that worker's fight. And what we witnessed was, by the hundreds of millions, not just a few million. Like, oh my goodness, the analytics on this was incredible, which is why Amazon could not get in front of that message. It plowed right through them because it actually came from the worker themselves. Yeah, you saw me and Sean O'Brien a little bit here and there make a couple statements, but 95% of the coverage was workers talking about the conditions they were facing. Workers talking about what was going on, drivers talking about how Amazon wants to deny their responsibility but have complete control over them. And so the story was able to get out. So what did it accomplish? I think the first thing that it accomplished was them exercising their rights, them exerting worker power, and them inspiring millions of others to do the same thing. I can tell you the amount of organizing leads that came in after that, and absolutely, it actually started in August of 2024, and I'm talking tens of thousands, tens of thousands, tens of thousands, tens of thousands. And then more and more workers are like, we get these calls going, can you bring it to my area? I'm in such and such city. When are you going to bring the picket line here? And obviously it's not that simple, but you have this energy where workers are like, I want to do that. How do I do that? And they just want to learn. So what did it do? It opened everybody's eyes, just like yours and anybody else that was glued to that TV going, what's going on? So now what's the next step? You said earlier in the show, it's been a little quiet. Well, right. the workers accomplished their goal. Now what you have is tens of thousands of other workers doing the exact same thing, and more of those workers are going to be exercising their rights very, very soon. Amazon is spending millions of dollars trying to get ahead of this, millions of dollars trying to figure out how to deal with the next wave.
And, of course, knowing Amazon and knowing Bezos and their leadership strategies, they're known to retaliate against folks. Did we see some of that in December? And if so, how are the Teamsters responding?
Sure, absolutely. As you go into any fight like that, someone's going to punch back. You have to anticipate that. And there was some retaliation that happened in January. There was lots of systems that were built and built out to help workers. But the point that I think came out most from workers is regardless of the retaliation, I just a couple days ago recorded something that's going to come out in a couple weeks where a driver said, the fear of retaliation from my employer pales in comparison to the fear of what happens if we do nothing. The direction that this is going, we don't have a choice but to draw the line in the sand and do something, because this is not good. And I would rather just move the fear out of the way of what I'm having to deal with now and whatever repercussions of retaliation come, and to what happens if nothing happens. Because again, that statistic I pointed out earlier, 75% of workers were looking for a job within the first week of going to work at Amazon. Well, guess what? They lean back into that and say, well, I was looking for a job when I found this one, because clearly it's not the best. So if it forces me to move on, it forces me to move on, but I'm going to help these workers.
Right. Well, that's actually something, back when RWDSU was trying to organize at Amazon in Bessemer, and that book still hasn't been written, I don't think. I think there's still some potential there, but I lent myself to the campaign for a couple of weeks, and I knocked on a bunch of doors, and that was something that I heard a lot of, was people scared about management firing them and things changing for the worse potentially. And that was something that, exactly like you said, is basically what I said to them. It was like, well, they could fire you tomorrow, for nothing. Even if you don't organize, like, they can fire you for any reason or no reason at all, basically. They could change everything that you like about your job right now, to the extent that you have 2 or 3 things that you don't mind about your job. They could change those tomorrow for any reason or no reason at all, and without consulting you. The only way to actually abate some of your concerns about retaliation or bad working conditions is to organize. That's the only way that you're going to have any way to kind of assuage your fears, is to take some of that power for yourself. And so if there's an Amazon worker who's listening to this and they're interested in organizing, where do we go? Where can we send them to get plugged into the campaign?
Teamster.org/Amazon. Teamster.org/Amazon. That is exactly where they go.
I appreciate that, Brother Corrigan. Teamster.org/Amazon. Check it out. The last thing that I want to ask you is, many unionists, folks who are active in the movement, we have to wear several hats. Myself and Adam, we co-host this radio program. We both have a day job.
Thank you for doing that, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you. We both have a day
come on
job.
Our show. Please come on our show.
I would love to. I'd love to. But yeah, we do this. We have day jobs. We have positions within our unions. We have leadership positions on the local AFL-CIO Labor Council. And we regularly find ourselves looking for more hours in the day, just not enough time to do anything or to do everything that needs to be done. And so I can only imagine that it's even more the case for you as the principal officer for a 16,000 person local, the national director of the most important union campaigns in the 21st century. And so, if for no other reason, then maybe I can get some time management tips. How do you juggle everything?
Let me just quickly redefine this campaign. It is the most militant approach to organizing that we have seen in the history of this country, because of its size and because of the current nature of our political climate. The most militant. Think about how we're approaching it. Have you ever seen anything like that? And so I really appreciate you asking that question and trying to, get people to hear, how is it that we find that time, or the demands where we get pulled a bunch of different directions. I think that the first way to answer that is there's so many great people out there, workers out there that are willing to help. It's first being able to find those individuals that are willing to help, that are like-minded in a space that they're willing to throw some time in, maybe not 100% of their time, but a fraction of their time. And then collectively, you get into a space where you figure out how to share that big task, that situation that you're taking on, whether it's at the local, a program in the local, or it's Amazon or pieces of work that we're doing at Amazon. And then once you find people that are engaged in the spirit of it, that have it in their heart, that actually truly want to help workers. This is not transactional. This is a movement, and we bring those people to the movement collectively. Then guess what? You have the productivity increases. Sometimes you have some differences, and they're spirited, and that's a lot. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's good. That's what makes democracy healthy, right? And then ultimately, at the end, you make a decision on how to move forward. But you find a lot of like-minded people, and then everybody helps carry the torch. It's not just one person carrying the torch. I am so fortunate to have lots of good people on my teams that are in all these different parts of the country on the Amazon, as well as parts of the area when it comes to the local union that I'm running. And everybody on the team is really bought into what it takes to help workers as a whole. Many of them went through the process themselves and recognize it. Many are inspired by a different reason, have been drawn in, and they want to help others, and they empathize with those challenges. And so I think part of it is first making sure that you have a really, really good team, and making sure that those people, that everybody's rowing the oar in the same direction, and that you're not working against each other, and that you get feedback, and you listen, and you understand what's driving things. And also, when the challenges start to happen, how do you help each other get over those challenges, and how do you build that network? That's what a union's all about. And then in the end, what keeps us going, and I think probably what keeps you going too, is the same, is we're tapping into that purpose. We're doing something bigger and better. It's bigger than just us as individuals. And we know we got to leave something for somebody behind. I was always raised that if you borrow something or you get something, always give it back to the person better than you received it. And that, when we have an obligation here in the labor movement, that we have to do the best we can on this rock as it's spinning through the universe, of at least the piece that we have is making it a little better for others behind us. Don't just use it and discard it. What you have to do is get in, build it up, make it a little bit better. And you can't do that as an individual. You always have to have a good group of people around you. And then what that does is when you're burning the midnight oil and you're tired, they're going to come to you and say, hey, you rest. I got this. Let me get this through so that you can get whatever maybe it's rest, maybe it's just simple rest or a little bit of sleep, or maybe they're going to take on a meeting for you. Today, I have multiple events happening in multiple parts of Southern California right now, where our teams are engaging in these events, and I'm here on a show. It's not like one person has to be in all those locations. It's multiple people that are engaged in the movement, that are all letting it fly, and they're willing to lay it out and make something happen. Once you bring enough of those people together, incredible things happen, because we look at what workers did in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Look at what they faced. This is easy compared to that. This is easy. And man, we take this for granted every single day. It's difficult. We're mad because we see things going backwards, and we want to fight and make sure we don't slip backwards. But man, we have got to appreciate the fact that people had it way worse than we did. And so suck it up and take that extra step, put the other foot in front of the other, and make it happen.
Brother Corrigan, that was a great answer. Secretary-Treasurer of the Teamsters Local 1932, National Director of the Teamsters Amazon Division, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work that you're doing for working folks in the country, and look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks for having me on. Come on our show, the Worker Power Hour.
All right, let's get it set up.
That was great. Right. Yeah, I really appreciated hearing that, and great way to end it as well. That's a great reminder. And, we opened the show talking about how tough it is this Labor Day, right? We're celebrating Labor Day. It's such a tough time right now, where we're experiencing some of the toughest times as a movement we've seen in a long time. But he's exactly right. We have been through worse. We have had worse conditions in this country. We've had worse exploitation and oppression. We have faced more violence. We have faced more state repression. And, that's not to say that it can't continue to get worse and go in that direction. And unfortunately, it does look like we're going backward in so many ways. So, but folks persevered. People who came before us fought, they sacrificed, they struggled, and they did what needed to be done to make lives better for themselves and their coworkers and their communities, and ultimately to build a better future for folks like us. So, it's up to us to take that mantle and keep moving forward. And, eventually folks like, my daughter and her generation and all those coming after are going to be able to pick up the mantle as well. And ultimately, they're counting on us.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.